I'm Scott Lucas. This is EA's worldview analysis for today. Is it World War III? Every day brings a new incident of tension across Ukraine. Pro-Russian demonstrators occupying buildings, the possibility of the Ukrainian government using security forces to clear them, clashes between so-called nationalists and those who believe that Ukraine should be closer to Moscow. With these incidents, each day brings an increase in the rhetoric and in the hyperbole. This is the possibility of World War III, of Russia, which remember used to be the Soviet Union, having a showdown with the United States, which had been fighting that Soviet Union and Moscow for decades. Political conflict over Ukraine and the demonstrations will give rise to the militaries clashing once again, not only over the fate of Kiev, but over the fate of Eastern Europe, and therefore the world. Whoa, step back, step way back. This is not to minimize the seriousness of the events in Ukraine. Already part of the country, the Crimea, has joined Russia. There's clear evidence that Moscow would at least like to get eastern Ukraine to break from Kiev, if not necessarily to separate the area entirely and annex it to the Russian Federation. But that doesn't mean that we're looking at a global campaign. The reason why Russia is carrying out this campaign is not because of Moscow's strength, but because of its weakness. Rewind 2 months back to February, when demonstrators opposing the corruption, the injustice, calling for reforms, overthrew President Yanukovych and forced him to flee to Russia, Moscow suffered a serious defeat. Yanukovych was their guy. He was the person ensuring that Ukraine would not drift too far into the orbit of the European Union and possibly NATO. Moscow had to act quickly, and it did. It used propaganda, it used political and economic pressure, and it put in thousands of troops. And the effectiveness of that move is not to be underestimated. Russia will continue to do this for days, weeks, months, until it believes that Ukraine is no longer a threat on its border. But this is a specific incident. It is one that speaks to notions held by Vladimir Putin, and let's face it, by many Russians, of their security. That facing the gradual expansion of the European Union, facing the gradual expansion of NATO, that Russia saw itself in a state of political and economic weakness versus the new Europe. It has chosen to react this way. It will lose in the long run. What has been lost in the fury over the Ukraine is that the European Union has gone too far, is that for all the headlines possibly about crisis in the Eurozone, problems in Greece, or Spain, or Portugal, it has an economic strength that far outstrips Moscow. That the global economy is one in which Russia is struggling to keep up. So take a look at today's headline announcement. Vladimir Putin says, if sanctions continue to be imposed on Russia over what it's doing in Ukraine, then Moscow will hit back. It might curtail or even expel foreign companies from Russia's energy sector. ExxonMobil, Chevron. Ooh, sounds ominous. And let's be honest, Russia does have another lever, which is that a significant percentage of Europe's energy comes from Russian pipelines. But that's a short-term threat. In the long run, Russia's energy sector cannot match up to energy sectors elsewhere in the world. Russia's industrial, manufacturing, even its military capabilities cannot compete on a global scale. Putin's smart enough to know this. The crisis in Ukraine may not end. But no, this is not World War III, because this is not two superpowers facing each other, as we had in the Cold War. This is a weakened, scared Russia facing the rest of the world and acting when and where and only where it can. I'm Scott Lucas, and this is today's EA Worldview analysis.